she was on over 200K.
Yeah.
So a decent income for someone that's renting, single person.
Yeah.
No kids. When we went through all of her expenditure, it transpired that she was spending a lot of money on like eating out and discretionary and all that kind of stuff. And we weren't there to tell her that she couldn't do that, but we were there to ask the question of like, why is this so disproportionately large for what we would expect for a normal single person expenditure? And the answer was that she felt like her friends would only hang out with her if she paid for all the stuff that they did together. And so on the weekends when she was doing social occasions, or inviting her friends to basically hang out with her, she would just pick up the bill for whatever they did. So she'd pick up the entire dinner bill or the entire brunch bill. And I think, that speaks to a lot of someone's position with money and also how the emotions you harbor and feelings you have around money can really start to play out in a negative way that affect you.
Welcome to It's No Secret, a podcast for Kiwis who want their money questions answered.
Ready, steady, go.
This podcast will answer the money questions you may or may not have on your mind. We'll talk to real Kiwis and share truths about our own financial lives.
Both the successes and the failures. Because the truth is, there is no secret to achieving financial freedom.
Hello and welcome to It's No Secret. I'm Christine.
And I'm Kat.
And today on the podcast, we are going to chat about money and guilt. Now, this is probably a topic that many people can relate to because it's pretty broad and it's also
relevant to every human.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, find me a human that doesn't feel guilty about something.
That has a financial element to it.
Exactly.
Really excited to talk about this today because I personally definitely have a lot of this. Okay. So to start off, I know it isn't very fun.
Is this a therapy session incoming?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Fantastic.
Cannot wait. Let's go. Love some free therapy. What is money guilt? And in my research, I found a definition from the lovely money coach Marnita Oppermann that defines money guilt as dealing with feelings of remorse, shame, or anxiety because of financial decisions or circumstances. So she says that often these emotional responses are triggered by impulsive spending or financial mistakes such as poor investment choices or being in debt.
Love this.
Or potentially just not spending in line with your values, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of a nice rounding out like what it is. And then the next natural progression is why do we feel these things?
Yeah.
So
I want to add to this because I do like this definition, but I think one of the things that we were talking about the other week that kind of prompted us to have this conversation was the fact that we often also feel guilty or have, I guess, emotional responses around money that are triggered for not necessarily bad things. So like the examples that she gives, which I think are really true, is often it is triggered by impulsive spending or financial mistakes. They both have like real negative connotations, like you've made a poor choice, right? Yeah. But what about the times when we feel guilty even though we've done the thing that we saved to do?
Yeah.
Right?
Or we hit the goal.
Exactly. We hit the goal and then we spend the money. Like we hit the goal and then we book the holiday and then we feel that buyer's remorse kick in of like, oh gosh, I can't see that money in my bank account anymore. Or the level of feeling guilt of, you're the person that just got a pay rise and you're wanting to go out and celebrate or, put some money towards like something to feel good about that. Yeah. But you're also getting hit with headlines around other financial tough times and recession and all that kind of thing. And so I think it's just really interesting that we can feel guilty from both positive and negative behaviors. And perhaps like there's more interest in how we feel guilty from a positive financial outcome as opposed to, I feel like feeling guilty from a negative financial outcome hopefully happens to most people. I feel like that's maybe a bit mean to say, but do you know what I mean? Like if you don't feel guilty because of a poor financial decision you've made, you're probably in a frame of mind or a situation in your life where you're not even focused on understanding what the impact of that decision is or trying to strive for better.
Yeah, I feel like there's an element of awareness there to firstly know, was that a poor decision or not, because what we might think is a poor decision, someone else might not, or might just not know. But then I think the point that you make around like if in hindsight you then regret that decision because of like valid logical reasons, then I feel like that's pretty like a given in some ways.
Exactly. Okay, so
Yeah,
before
nice.
we kick off onto talking about like, well, what really drives feeling guilty with spending money or feeling guilty with money in general, when was the last time you felt any guilt about your financial choices?
Like last week.
Okay,
Or this week.
tell us a specific scenario. What was it about? What did you spend? What did you do?
Yeah, so I spent a significant amount of money on my health again. Yeah. And I feel very embarrassed even talking about it because I think people will hear, like, I'm happy to share how much I spent. I spent $2,000 on basically getting some genetic testing and it's this other type of test with my naturopath to understand like why my energy levels are so low. And so it's like, it's an upfront cost that hopefully is going to mean that the sessions with the naturopath are like, you know, more informed and that kind of thing. So ultimately get me to a better outcome of like improving my health. But $2,000 feels like a crap load of money, especially when in the last Money Moments episode, I'm over here saying, oh, would it be nice to buy a house, right? And I look at that and I'm like, I break that out into how many like pay cycles would I need to save that back basically, and what's the opportunity cost of using that money on other things. But then I have to remind myself that like being healthy is a core belief and something that I really value, probably more so than going out for dinners and eating out and those kinds of things. And so it actually prompted me to completely review like how I'm spending my money and the buckets that I'm putting money into, which we'll get into later. Okay. But I think since actually sending the money off, I'm just like, oh, is that the right decision? Like all that kind of stuff. But I also out of mind now. Maybe. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, but this is a perfect example. This is the natural progression, I think, of what happens is because I'm hearing like you obviously spent the money in line with things that you value and that are important to you, which is essentially the first tick of like how to maybe go through life without feeling too guilty about what you spend money on. You also spent the money from savings that you already had. You haven't put it on a credit card. You haven't gone into like short-term debt in order to do that thing. So again, second green tick to be like, okay, this is not a poor financial decision because you've pulled the money from savings that are available to you. You don't have any other immediate goals outside of, I know you guys,
a holiday.
Which I'm assuming you already have money still set aside for. So I look at that as an objective point of view and just think, well, that's okay. You shouldn't feel guilty doing that because it ticks all the boxes of, I guess, things that are aligned around how you want to use and spend your money. And so herein
why do I still feel guilty?
Herein lies the challenge. Herein lies the challenge. So let's dig into that.
This is like the epitome of this episode.
Yes, but herein lies the challenge. So I'm going to hit you with some theories that I have around this.
Yes, nice.
So I'm going to guess that you are concerned about being judged, as everybody is, because we are social creatures and we want to be kept, we want to be part of the group. We want to be accepted. We want to be loved. We want to be liked. And your fear of admitting to people in your immediate social circle around the fact that that's how you spent $2,000, is that something that maybe is triggering your feelings?
Even like to the level where, I mean, I obviously tell Ollie these things and work through it, but I get like, I embarrassed when I tell him, like, and he's the person that I should like not give a crap about. Yeah, exactly. Or what he thinks.
Yeah. Who else do you tell? Is there anyone that you've told, but beyond all the listeners?
Everyone on the podcast now.
Okay.
Yeah. So outside of that, no, I haven't told anyone because it's just, I just carry so much shame. And I think it's like maybe not the traditional thing by what society tells you to spend your money on in terms of like it being an asset or investing that money or saving towards something that feels less frivolous,
Yeah. Fascinating.
So definitely judgment is a big one.
Yeah. Judgment is a big one. Being like outed by the group, so to speak, for making a choice that perhaps is not widely accepted as one that other people would do.
Totally. And I think another one is also, it is really like, well, what else could I have done with that money to get myself ahead in other ways or in the future? So where, like, what other investments would I put that in? And then what's the, like, how much would that grow by? But then ultimately, like, you have to make some decisions based on your life, not just let your finances drive everything, right?
Yes, exactly. That's a really interesting point, because when I was chatting about this topic with someone that we work in, their view was that response around the opportunity cost or like the fear of missing out of what else I could have otherwise done and achieved with that money, they thought was something that was heightened for people that worked within financial services because you're potentially more aware of the, I guess, alternatives, or you're kind of accustomed to perhaps doing like some quick math and knowing, okay, well, that $2,000 could have gone towards my investment account, which over, 10 years is roughly whatever. But I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I feel like it is potentially more top of mind because it's maybe just there. Yeah. But I feel like that kind of comparison opportunity cost is ingrained with everybody in whatever way that they know. And I think about this we were chatting with someone that we know who was saving for a wedding and had a really expensive wedding because culturally they needed to invite a lot of people to the wedding and it was going to be a significant cost. And they knew that the wedding was funded and all saved for and fine, but in sort of the 4 months leading up to the wedding, as they were walking around with their fiance, walking the dog in the neighborhood, would be going past cars on the street and pointing out like, oh, instead of having a wedding, like we could buy that car or we could house. Do like, this would be a, 50% deposit towards that type of like unit, that kind of thing. And so it's just really interesting that I think it's a natural point of comparison, right? Like comparison is also something that is super ingrained to us as a human being because it comes down to our core requirement to survive. Like in order to basically survive, we need to know where we stand comparative to other people in our circle. Yeah. When we were like cavemen, we need to know who's the alpha. We need to know what our position is. And it is about, recognizing that whilst comparison can be good for some things, it does also fuel potentially negative emotions like guilt and stress around money because we're naturally ingrained to seek out pieces of information that either reconfirm we've made a good choice and that the wedding was a really good thing to spend X amount of dollars on, or your health was a really good thing to spend $2,000 on, or alternatively, we're also seeking out information to confirm the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's then how we deal with that, I think, in our internal monologue that ultimately is going to give you comfort, right? Which is tough.
Yeah. Do you think it links to this idea of scarcity and abundance mindset? Because it's, the validation, the mindset that you come in with is the lens at which you're going to then seek the validation. So if you're coming from scarcity, you're like looking for all the things that tell you the negative is true versus abundance. If you come in with there's enough, there's more money where that came from, blah, blah, blah.
I'll replace that $2,000 within a couple of months.
I can save that back.
That'll be okay.
Totally.
That will happen for me. And I feel positive about that because this is ultimately going to compound on my ability to move forward anyway.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I think mindset, your natural mindset position is huge. Your active mindset position is also huge. Like, if you kind of naturally come from a scarcity mindset, but you're aware of that and you're actively trying to think about money in a different way, then that's a good thing too. I think it also depends on, who's in your circle and who's in your sphere of pieces of information and reference points. And one thing I actually was watching this morning, the Keep the Change podcast, and Luke was talking about how there are various groups on Facebook, and there'll be like one that is in New Zealand of basically it's just a group talking about why it's so hard to get ahead.
Oh, yeah.
And then there'll be other groups that are like
abundance.
Ideas to get ahead, like, and people exactly. And he's like, you have to, it's an active choice as to deciding which of those types of groups you're going to participate in. And I think it's a similar thing with, say, your social circle and the whole idea of you are the average of the 5 people around you. And, if you are aware that you are someone that maybe comes from a scarcity mindset or has a lot of negative kind of internalized beliefs around money, potentially from how you grew up, or the type of messaging you received from your parents or those around you throughout your childhood, a lot of that takes quite a bit of time to unwind. And it's therefore more important that you surround yourself with positive influences to try and change how you perceive and internalize those things. Yeah. Because ultimately, in your example, no one knows or cares about you spending $2,000. Like
Except me.
That's the hard, honest truth, right? You know,
It's
unless
so
we
true.
had talked about it today, I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
The potty wouldn't know. You know, no one knows, and no one is therefore thinking about it or judging you. And hopefully, over time, you get healthier, and then maybe 12 months down the track, I'm like, wow, Christine,
money ever spent.
you're glowing. Why? And then you tell me.
Genetic testing is the way.
Exactly. But, you know, it's really funny because for you in that moment, it's so big, and it's then how you think about that and relieve yourself from potentially feeling guilt or other strong emotions, because ultimately it's you spending 90% of time thinking about that and no one else even like registering in their minds that this is the thing.
It's so true, and that you like care more about, it's what there's this saying where you care more about other people's lives than they like care about yours or something,
Yes.
you know, like
Yes.
they actually, everyone's just going about their day thinking constantly about themselves and worried about what other people think of them, not actually thinking about other people. So it's like,
And half of the people that hear that you spent $2,000 on that will forget about that within 2 weeks, 4 weeks,
listen to 2
whatever.
episodes and you've forgotten it.
Exactly. And then, you know, they kind of carry on. But if you're in a space where you're really harboring a lot of guilt around that expenditure or money in general, that can live with you for quite a long time, and then can also negatively impact how you, I guess, create future money behaviors.
For sure. And even just the mindset piece. Coming back to that quickly, I was thinking of a friend who moved to Singapore, and he was on the podcast, Jervis. If you go back and listen, yeah, he's the best. He was talking about how there's obviously tall poppy syndrome in New Zealand, and I think the societal like norms also can greatly influence, you know, your perspective, just like in terms of what you share, confidence, all that thing, but also relating to money. And he was talking about how when he moved to Singapore, it's just interesting to see the complete like different mindset over there, where because there's such an abundance of money and like just generally the economy and the financial markets are so much bigger, and he worked in finance, his mindset completely changed to be like, well, there's actually just a lot of money out there. I only need a small slice of it. Not like, oh my God, I need to save as much as I can, and like there's not enough money for me, and all that kind of stuff.
Christine's doing really well, so therefore I can't do as well because she's taking all the resource in order to spend $2,000 on her health, while was me. And it's like, actually,
there's enough for everyone.
Exactly. There absolutely is. And I think that's a really good point, because that is also part of it, is oftentimes when there is perhaps a reluctance from people to share a positive financial outcome that they've experienced in their world, it's because of the fear of people judging them or making comments around the fact that them being successful means that other people can't. And it's like, no.
We can all elevate together.
Exactly. It's not a zero-sum game. Just because Christine's succeeding doesn't mean that therefore I have to fail. And so recognizing that actually sometimes allowing yourself to like lean into other people's successes and championing that or celebrating that for them is also a really positive thing, because if you are trying to, you know, lessen your guilt around money or move ahead financially or change your mindset, you need to be around people that are actively able to do that and showing that they can do that. It's not going to help you move in the right direction if you are still in a space where I guess everything is focused on the negative.
Yeah, for sure. I think also just digging one layer deeper, it's important to ask a question of like, why am I taking that mindset in the first place? Like, is it because you're projecting out potentially that you're feeling low confidence, or that you don't value, you know, you like self-worth, things like that? Because you can do things like, that's how you change your mindset. There's this idea called narrative therapy, and it's all about, apparently there's a lot of research around how effective it is in changing your neuro pathways to basically, that's why is
this affirmations based thing where it's like, if you do write the same sentence every morning for 10 years.
It's gratitude journaling.
Okay. Yes.
And like, you know, and just like catching the moments where you say, I'm not enough, or I don't have enough, or those things, and literally telling yourself, there is enough, I'm okay, self-soothe, like work this lot of hours spent in therapy on this, so I can vouch for it. And that's how you actually change it.
Okay. So, I mean, Going down to like then past experiences and formed beliefs. We have talked on the pod before about how your core money beliefs as a child are basically ingrained really, really early, like by basically age 4, much earlier than people would kind of expect. And the language in which you are surrounded by through your parents or relatives when talking about money and the inadvertent conversations that you overhear and all that kind of stuff definitely is ingrained in you in an early age. Do you feel like you have an experience where you're trying to change it, or have we talked to anyone on the show about this?
Not really changing beliefs. I think a lot of people that we speak to, it's quite hard to remember what exactly they are. I mean, other than the common sayings like turn the lights off or like short showers, like those things to save money.
I am a hardcore short showers person, but not because it's a financial benefit, because growing up in Australia, you had it so drilled into you that we had droughts all the time. Like, it's weird to me. There's 2 things that are like my pet peeve on this. It's weird to me that people have long showers. I don't really understand it because it was just never a thing. And then the second one is people that leave the tap on whilst they're cleaning their teeth. My God. Yeah. I just absolutely cannot. And actually recently I almost had a full-blown confrontation with someone about this in a caravan park because them and their child were both cleaning their teeth and they had the tap running, and it took all of my internal willpower to not reach over the sink and turn the tap off for them. And I was like, mate, Kat, just don't. Anyway, maybe I should. That's my pet peeve. So
how do you feel about baths then?
I feel fine about baths because I think for me it's a fixed amount. Yes. Whereas the idea of kind of standing in the shower for 10 minutes. I'm sure some scientists that listen to the show will be like, Kat, it's the same amount of water used, which is fine. But my logic is like, I can't contain the amount of water in the shower situation because I don't know how much water is going out, whereas I do in the bath.
Okay.
And baths aren't an everyday thing. Showers are an everyday thing.
For me at the moment they are. I'm so like, yes, we're house sitting. There's a bath. Yes. Okay. What about, on the topic of water.
Yes.
Washing the dishes, because there's this thing in New Zealand where we basically fill the sink and wash all of the dishes in dirty water, basically. So do you do that or do you run the tap?
I fill the sink halfway and then rinse the tap for rinsing. But I am now also, now that we have a dishwasher post-renovations, which we didn't pre-renovations, I'm just in the camp of everything was in the dishwasher.
Even the pots?
All the pots. Even my wooden spoons, which I know is a no-no, but guys, I don't give a shit at this point. I am here for efficiency and time. And also the fact that I think I was like actually a bit scarred of living in a house with a really small sink and a shoddy old kitchen that we did hand washing for 5 years before we basically renovated. And I'm like, never again. It's just my thing. I just can't go back. So no.
Okay. Anyway, tangent.
Let's talk about survivor's guilt, because I feel like this is something that maybe doesn't get as much airtime because hot topic, tall poppy syndrome, and people just don't like to recognize that, hey, actually sometimes it's also quite challenging if you are, I'll rephrase, it can be quite challenging emotionally if you are the person that feels like you're the success outlier in your social circle. And there can be lots of different ways in which this can play out. It can be, you feel conscious and want to be understanding of asking those around you to do things that cost money, i.e. maybe, if you have a birthday or if you have more disposable income and your version of enjoyment is brunching every weekend, you probably don't want to brunch by yourself. So, who are you inviting? How are you reflecting your choices onto that? I think about this one a lot because I remember working with a client back in Melbourne who was on a very high income, a single person, female, and she had a lot of debt and a lot of personal debt, and part of our work together was trying to obviously get her back to neutral from the debt perspective, particularly given she had such a high income. Like, I'm going to say this was, 8-9 years ago, and at that time she was on over 200K. Yeah. So a decent income for someone that's renting, single person. Yeah. No kids. And when we went through all of her expenditure, it transpired that she was spending a lot of money on like eating out and discretionary and all that kind of stuff. And we weren't there to tell her that she couldn't do that, but we were there to ask the question of like, why is this so disproportionately large for what we would expect for a normal single person, you know, expenditure? And the answer was that she felt like her friends would only hang out with her if she paid for all the stuff that they did together. And so on the weekends when she was doing social occasions or inviting her friends to basically hang out with her, she would just pick up the bill for whatever they did. So she'd pick up the entire dinner bill or the entire brunch bill. And I think, you know, that speaks to a lot of someone's position with money and also how the emotions you harbor and feelings you have around money can really start to play out in a negative way that affect you, probably not affecting those other people. They're probably having a fantastic time. Yeah. Potentially even saving money. Who knows?
Yeah. But also even like emotions that you harbor outside of just like money, and money's how it's then reflected in terms of like why do you feel like you can only make friends if you pay for everything?
Well, money can be the vehicle that is then used to basically overcome or deal with other negative emotions or challenges that you have in your life. And that can then also compound the guilt that you feel around it because, you know, that's a really tough position for her because let's think about, you know, you've set this expectation with your friends that that's the level of generosity that you have in your life. And then all of a sudden you're dealing with a financial advisor who's telling you that you need to cut your expenses. How do you then go and front up to those people and say, hey, me doing this on the weekend has actually put me in debt? Yeah. That's a way harder conversation to have and a very challenging thing to kind of confront. So, yeah, it is a bit of a tricky one. But I think this is potentially where, the whole idea of like survivor's guilt, which is obviously that if you survive some kind of incident or thing, you're obviously very grateful to be there, but then you feel very guilty around, you know, feelings of like, why me? Why was I the person that lucked out and didn't die in the car crash kind of thing? And when you apply this to money, and particularly in this current economic environment where there is a lot of doom and gloom, the government is running a platform on the basis of like getting the economy back in, you know, and I think some campaign slogan going around at the moment of like survive to 25, which is basically like, I know, right? What? So if you're reading that and you're like, well, hold on a second, I'm
not surviving.
I'm thriving. I'm, you know, because they're talking to the masses. And what if you're not in the masses? Yeah. What if you are the person that's like going to Europe for 6 months to live your best life, or, you know, you're upgrading your house, or you're doing renovations, or you're going on holidays every school holidays because you can afford that in a period of time right now? I feel like the judgment or the potential for judgment can really intensify and therefore add layers of guilt to those people that perhaps would otherwise not have felt guilty about that at all.
Yeah. Another thought that I had while you were saying that is also around, like, I think the guilt and also extends to family, not just friends, in terms of like you're guilty about other things and then you make up for that in terms of monetary things. So like maybe you weren't as present as a parent, or maybe there was a messy divorce or things that went down. So then you feel like you need to overcompensate and then give a lot of money or those kinds of things. And so then that can lead to potentially also putting you in a worse financial situation if you can't afford it. Any thoughts? You know, like I think it's just such a tricky thing where
it is so tricky.
Emotions are so wrapped up in the like monetary element of the relationship that sometimes it can be the driving force rather than like a secondary thing.
For sure. And I think the challenge as well with that, with any relationship and money, or even your own relationship to money, is how do you navigate changing that? Because we obviously talked at the start of the episode that like how you grew up or what your feelings or emotions were to money originally doesn't have to define how you live your life forever, right? But when you start to incite change in any area, it could be stopping drinking, going to the gym more,
getting healthy,
exactly, like not going out as much, or it could be making money choices in a different way. You naturally feel, even if you have supportive people around you, you naturally feel a little bit uncomfortable doing that, right? Because you're worried about, okay, well, how is my family going to react? Or what are the things that I'm going to have to say no to that I previously would have said yes to? And then how much detail am I going to have to go into to explain to them why I'm doing this? And we're not accustomed to going into that level of detail because we don't talk openly about money as a society. And so all of those things make it compoundingly hard. And I guess, without it sounding too doom and gloom, because we feel chatting on the negative. So like, how do you overcome that? Things that I've seen work, and knowing or reflecting on my personal experience where it's worked really well, is you have to have someone on your team, right? Like making sure that, for us, Luke and I are really aligned on that kind of stuff. If we are trying to, at the moment, we're doing a gym challenge because we want to look fantastic.
2024, the year of the glow up.
I mean, also, I just want to look great going to the Taylor Swift concert in Europe. But
I mean, there's that too.
There's that motivation. But we're doing a gym challenge. And of course, it was driven by Luke. He wanted to do it, but I've jumped on board because doing the healthy eating together is way easier. Going to bed early so that we can wake up earlier to go to the gym is easier if we're doing it together. And the same thing applies for our money. If we are actively trying to save towards something or make a different lifestyle choice, we need each other to be on board with that, so that if you feel like you're not getting supported from a friend or a colleague or a family member who's questioning your choices, you have someone else to then back you up or just reconfirm with you why you decided to do that thing in the first place. And that could be really tricky if you are a single person. So it's, finding your friend or finding your family member, that one person that you do feel confident enough to share the more ins and outs. In the instance of the client that was in debt and spending money, for her, we were probably that person as her financial advisor to basically try and keep her accountable and show her why it was going to be so important and positive for her to change her behavior. And so if it's like, find your partner.
I was
in whatever sense of the word that means.
I was thinking that exact point in terms of like, I recently got a personal trainer, and whilst it is, again, I feel very guilty spending that money because it is a substantial amount of money. For me, it's like I was not exercising without that accountability. And so knowing that I'm focusing on my health, like sometimes you just have to pay to get the accountability that's then going to mean that you're better off in the long run. And I think that's really relevant for, in this instance, of a financial advisor, in terms of like even just them also validating that, like, okay, we've got your budget, we've allocated this amount of money to guilt-free spending or whatever it is, you are allowed to spend that money on these things that you want because all the other needs are met. So like, let's try to like psychologically remove the guilt that associated with those things that you potentially historically have felt guilty about.
Love this. Very good point. So question back to you. What is in your guilt-free spending? Like, what are you what do you just not feel guilty about or think twice about spending money on?
Healthy food.
Okay,
it's always the thing. Like, perfect. I'm like, I know.
You go to the supermarket and you're like, whatever. Don't care.
I mean, within reason. Like, I don't go to like Faro and go get all the nice things, but I think like buying veggies and high quality meat and those things, because I know that it's going to pay dividends in terms of making me feel good. And also I just think that's like non-negotiable.
What else? Coffees?
Yeah, actually.
I was going to say, you buy coffee every day, and I feel like
that's
just
my thing.
Doesn't
that's my
even
trait,
flag on your radar.
Because I also think like working that out, a coffee for me is like $5.50, $6 a day. Maybe that's $35 a week times 52. Like, is that going to be the chunky expense that like really impacts my ability to get to financial goals?
I love this. This has literally perfectly led me on to another point that I've been thinking about on this money and guilt topic, which is I feel like we each have an ingrained threshold to which we feel like is your comfort level of what you can spend to, either cumulatively, so in the example that you just said, over the course of a year, you've rationalized within yourself that those one coffee a day is not going to materially add up for you to be a significant amount to warrant any feeling of guilt or hesitation. Whereas there will be potentially some other total number. I have a guess of maybe what it is given our prior conversation at the start of this episode. But I think that that's also really important to understand or think about on an individual level, because everybody's number will be different. Everybody's number will be relevant to their situation, their importance on financial security, their perception of their level of financial security. That number will probably change over time as your situation changes.
Well, in terms of like, you might hold on to that and anchor to that even as your income increases.
Or your net worth or asset base also rises. So it's really important. So do you have a number?
Well, I think just to put you on the spot, to your point, I like the fact that I feel uncomfortable about spending $2,000. I think it's also in one lump sum, like rather than staggered throughout, because I feel like it's harder to justify. But I'd say probably like $1,000 feels like a lot.
Okay. So you could go potentially on the weekend and you haven't shopped in a while and you could see a dress and it's like $600.
Oh. I think that's because of what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like clothes for me carries a lot of guilt.
Okay. So you could be loving
like
your
saunas.
you could be loving saunas.
So like,
they could be having a deal and you could buy a 10-pack and it's $600, $500 and you
done.
Okay, done.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Because I'm like, I can use that once a week for 3 months.
Sure. Also very values aligned for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Less so than clothes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about clothes. So weird. I think
so with something above $1,000, like then what goes through your mind?
I think I start to weigh up, well, what else could I do with this money? Like, what's the opportunity cost? And then, but also then it's like, okay, well,
how important is it to me?
Yeah. And is it like in the values thing? So I think with the health spending, I overcame that because I like understand that that's a line. But for something, even like travel, I don't know, like the fact that I found it so hard to fork out for accommodation and things like that for an upcoming trip. I'm like, because it just feels also like less of ROI maybe, whereas like health is like
long-term ROI.
Yeah, or like I feel it in my body, whereas like staying in an Airbnb, I'm like, cool, I slept in a different bed. Like,
but perhaps also became refreshed. That was a longer-term ROI. I don't know.
Yeah. But what about you? What's your threshold?
It's interesting you say that because I thought I was going to say or knew what my threshold is, but now that you've also brought in it depends on the category of spend or the area in which you're spending, I do think that rings true for me. So the kind of, I think my gut feel threshold now is $10,000.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And I do need to caveat this with a few things so that people on the pod aren't like, whoa, what's Kat buying for under $10,000 every weekend? Like nothing.
A lot of clothes.
Exactly. No, so I think it's when things become for like a chunkier expense that's say somewhere in the realm of $5,000 to $10,000, I definitely think about it a bit more and then it starts to fall into that category of like, what do we really value? So the example that I talked about recently on the podcast that got a bit of heat, so I'm going to talk about it again, was the painting.
Yeah.
So buying an artwork that cost $8,500. Weirdly in my mind, although Luke and I have never really talked about it, the threshold for me is I probably wouldn't buy a piece of art for more than $10,000 based on our current financial situation. Yeah. There's art that I would absolutely love to buy for more than $10,000 that I've got on my like life wish list, but I don't really consider it. Whereas when it's less than $10,000, it is in the realm of consideration, right? Okay. And so when it's in the realm of consideration, I then start going through, okay, well, what is this? And for that specific example, I was at the art show by myself. Luke wasn't there. I had not gone in with the intention of buying anything. I had just gone to look and drink champagne and be away from my kid. So like,
love that for you.
That's where I was at mentally. And then I was pleasantly surprised that there were a couple of things that I really liked. And then, of course, more pleasantly surprised to learn that they were under $10,000.
It's like a win-win-win.
Literally. I was like, okay, didn't really think this. And interestingly enough, how that played out is I took a photo of 2 paintings that I was looking at, sent them to Luke and was like, what do you think? He was like, I love this one. And then basically was like, you should buy it without even asking me what the cost was or, you know, essentially giving me full permission for just like make your best choice. Like you just make a choice. It's all good.
Can I just say shout out to Luke? Like I feel like he's such a cheerleader.
He is. He really is. And so then I was there by myself having that internal struggle of like $8,500 is pretty close to 10. It's closer to 10 than we've gone before. Like
the middle point between 5 and 10.
Exactly. I was having a little bit of an internal struggle with it, but I was like, it's also not 10, Kat, and this money's coming out of savings. Like you're not going into debt for this. Also something that you really value.
You can technically sell it on probably in
future.
Yes,
you're going to keep it for many, many years is the plan. You haven't bought a piece of artwork in the time. You can see like everybody has that justification monologue that goes through their mind. And so that was happening. And then I think I might have texted Luke back, kind of maybe prompting him to ask me how much it was, just to like sense check. No, I didn't ask him how much it was. I said, what would be the max that you'd pay for this?
So are you trying in that moment to like validate that it's okay, or is it that you're like trying to get him to talk you out of it? Or
I'm trying to validate that it's okay, but I'm also trying to validate that my gut feel of our max comfort level of 10 grand is on par with his, because we hadn't explicitly talked about it in quite some time. And I think also because we've bought other pieces of art together that have been less than that. And so I was a bit like, I don't want to come into this or come home saying I've bought this thing and he's assumed it's $5,000 and then finds out that it's 8.5.
Oh, I see.
And maybe,
so it's like a comms thing.
Yeah, it was more just a like, are we on the same page? And he texted me back and said I would pay essentially like no more than 10.
Yeah,
and I was like, sweet, I'm in the clear. I'm in the green. Like, we're on the same page.
If
we're all
anything, I'm
feeling good about it. And then I didn't even tell him how much it was. I just bought it and I was like, yippee, I bought this artwork. We have to pick it up on Monday. And he's like, cool. And then it really wasn't until we got the valuation for insurance purposes that he was like, oh, yeah, cool. And so I think the threshold internally is really important and different, because then I tried to apply that same thing as you were talking to travel. And I'm like, well, I know that the threshold for travel has to be different at times because just the reality of going overseas on a 3-person family holiday, which I'm starting to learn is our future state of expensiveness, is very different to going on holiday as a couple, like particularly accommodation and stuff. So it just, I was like, that threshold doesn't apply, because I wouldn't look at that and then completely write the holiday off if it was going to cost more than 10 grand. And so it does depend a little bit on the category. But then to your point about clothes, I would never spend $5,000 on an item of clothing.
Neither.
You know? And so it also is, I think, deeply ingrained to understanding your values and then also understanding your perhaps like just general level of comfort for each of those values.
Do you think a starting point for also understanding that is like next time you, like when you buy stuff for the next week, like take a moment to reflect when you go to buy that thing, what is the emotion I'm feeling right now?
Are you having that moment of like, ooh,
or am I like, swipe away?
Or are you basically just it's not registering, or it registers maybe a little bit and then you think about it for a tiny piece of time and you're kind of like, you know what, that's fine. I can rationalize that really quickly. It's not occupying space in my head.
Or to your point, like maybe if you're in a relationship, maybe just sense checking that if it's shared money, then like, are we on the same page here?
Exactly.
I want to pick up on that point as well, because I was thinking about how would Ollie and I do that in that situation. And I feel like because we don't have combined finances, it's a very different like decision making process to in comparison. You guys have shared finances, all that kind of stuff, right?
Money out of our combined savings for it that otherwise could be used for some other general goal that we have. So I did feel like I at least need to have Luke on board with the purchase.
But I also think, like for me, I think the potential guilt like of me overspending on things that I value more than Ollie values is probably a big reason as to why we haven't combined our finances. But
great call out.
Because I like openly say this to him, that I'm nervous that I'll be the spender and he'll be the saver, and then he'll start to resent me for what I spend on.
But what if your spenders on different things?
Exactly.
Because I think the trick there is that you're not ever going to get to the point where you have the same money values. It's highly, highly uncommon
to be like
couples
for like.
Have 100% crossover in money values. And, my experience as an advisor when I worked at firms that do essentially like values-based exercises to try and identify exactly the things that we're talking about, so that as people go through the process of trying to change things in their financial life, you have the information to work with to be like, hey, Christine, you've told us that you don't value artwork, so why are you spending money over here when actually you're not then going to have enough resource to spend money on travel, which is what you really value. And so what we would typically see, we kind of had a running joke in the business that I worked in that did this exercise, was the people that undoubtedly ended up divorced were those that had more values misaligned than those that were aligned, and the people that ended up in essentially kind of longer term marriages were those that had sort of, at least a 50 to 75% crossover.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So let's say you have to pick your top 5 values out of, get some values cards, get the list of like 50 on the internet.
Yeah.
And, you do that and your partner does that. You're hoping that you've got at least 2 matching or that are very similar. So, someone might pick like relationships as their top value and someone might pick family because their family relationships are their top value. And so they're quite similar and aligned. But, if you're saying that your top values are like health, family, experience, security, and then Ollie's are security, like freedom, flexibility, things that are more future aligned, more security based, more not abundance, but do you know what I mean? More based in essentially like financial stability and control. That's the type of thing that then can be really challenging for someone that strongly values things that require spending.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's where you guys are at, but trying to paint the example, right? Because then it's a case of like you're not necessarily being painted as the spender and he's being painted as the saver, but he's just trying to potentially act in a way that is really aligned to his values and making sure that he feels confident about future security and stability, which is then naturally a little bit misaligned with perhaps you wanting to enjoy the now, have longevity based on spending on your health or, investing in relationships and travel, which requires money to be spent.
I feel like maybe Ollie and I should come on the podcast and do this exercise.
Great.
Because I think it would be quite fascinating to also understand for the listeners of like, how do you replicate this in real time? Because I think it is probably also maybe when you get to a point where you're starting to move in separate directions or like just starting like, maybe there's a little bit of tension here, coming back to those underlying values is probably really
good thing.
Yeah, and really valuable.
It also really helps, I think, for you as an individual to like relinquish guilt of your own spending. But also the more important part is not pass judgment on someone else, because the biggest killer that you're going to get to in a couple with money is that if you don't have a deep understanding of what is driving that person to make those decisions and you can't empathize with how they're making choices, you're naturally going to pass judgment. And this happens in any relationship, right? Like I didn't feel guilty or have any second guesses about spending $8,500 on a painting. In fact, I was sending photos to people. I was like, look at my sick new artwork. It's on my Instagram story. Like, love this for me, showing it off. And then we talked about it on the pod and received some criticism that was really out of touch and people didn't like it. And that is the exact thing I'm talking about, where it's like for that person that I guess judged that, essentially, judging my choice, is because their values alignment is completely different to mine. And so it's then putting them in a position of judgment, which I can understand, but then that puts me in a position of like guilt that I otherwise didn't harbor. And so imagine that playing out in a couple or like a core relationship, your best friend, whatever that might be. That can be something that can be really hard for your relationship to maintain over time.
Especially when your values evolve, I think. Like you grow as a person and you like what I valued when I was 21 is different to what I value now and things like that.
And that's A-okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of like ensuring that you come back together at some point, hopefully.
So to round out this episode, because I feel like this has been a really, really great chat, and in the spirit of you just opening up to everybody about what you're feeling guilty about, I'm going to just say that the thing I'm currently not harboring guilt on, but actively withholding because I think I fear judgment and perhaps other people commenting on it is obviously the spend on the Taylor Swift tickets.
I knew you were going to say it.
She's like, we're here.
I was like, T-Swift.
We're here. So a couple of things that I will shout out about this, and I will not care. So a couple of things. Firstly, shout out to my husband because he decided and actively put aside money from our savings to buy me these tickets because he knew that I would I was dying to go kind of thing. And so the choice was made for me. So that I feel really good about because I then didn't have to go through like the financial guilt drama in my mind, the justification. He was basically like, I've told your best friend Jason that we're buying 2 tickets, one for him, one for you. Their money's been put aside. You're going in London on these dates, the end, like done deal.
I love that.
Yeah. So I was like, cool. problem was then I actually had to buy the tickets because he hadn't yet bought them on StubHub. So I had to do that. So that was fine. And I bought the 2 tickets and they were $5,000.
I mean, it hurts, but I'm also like, I kind of get it because it's Taylor Swift and
I know.
You know.
The thing that hurts
they better be good tickets. Are they up the front?
We're in the mosh pit, like at the
okay,
front.
nice.
So
Okay,
it
good.
is that thing of like, we're standing close by.
Yeah.
We opted for slightly more pricey tickets. Some of the tickets, holy moly, like front row seated, I'm like beyond
Is it like
10 grand.
Oh gosh.
Yeah,
that's
like
a lot of money.
there were
Yeah.
price points that I was like, oh my God, this is so
like
beyond
outrageous,
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then the thing that's really funny about it is, and Jason does follow us on Instagram, so if this gets turned into a reel, hi Jason. He sometimes does listen to the show, but he is one of my best friends. He lives in Amsterdam. We don't get to see each other a whole heap, and we've both had a few different challenging times over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And so in preparation for this trip where we're spending a lot of time with him and his family, I was actually thinking about buying him a friendship ring, which sounds so
cute.
I know, because Steph, my other best
Don't
friend,
listen, Jason.
I know,
Don't listen. Is this a surprise?
well, no. So backtracking. So Steph and I have like best friend rings that we wear all the time
Oh my God,
that we
cute.
got when we went on a holiday together, and it's been like such a really
Probably
great.
better than a tattoo. I'm not
Yeah,
gonna lie.
well, yeah. So we love them, wear them all the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'd really like to replicate this for Jason. That we could do a really fun thing. And of course, after getting my ring from the jeweler at the end of last year, I was like, oh my God, they could make a really cool, like they make rings to match all the time.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about doing that, and I wanted it to be nice. And so it probably was going to cost me like $4,000 for the 2 of them anyway, because they would be gold and they'd have sapphires and anyway.
So we're not just getting like a
I know
$2 shop ring.
No. We're getting a nice ring that we can both keep forever.
Yeah.
So that was in the back of my mind, and I was planning that. And then Luke dropped the Taylor Swift bombshell and basically was
I
like,
see.
Jason is coming because we can afford, like we're paying for both of the tickets.
Yeah.
And I was like, amazing. And
Yeah,
so then
nice.
it was kind of funny because although I probably in another situation wouldn't spend $5,000 on going to a concert, that does seem like something that is not 100% aligned to my values.
Yeah,
What
okay.
is really aligned to my values is Taylor Swift. Sorry, people.
The person giving the concert.
Yes,
Yeah.
but also the fact that it's really important to me to invest not only time but money in what is essentially like really memorable experiences with key relationships in my life. And this is one of them. And I'm not going to have lots of opportunities to do that because we literally live on polar ends of the earth.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I was like, well, I had already mentally committed to spending this money on these rings. It makes total logical sense that actually I'm going to spend that money on this trip instead, and we're going to have 48 hours in London that's basically just the 2 of us on a girls trip living our best
And
life.
that you'll remember for the rest of your life.
Exactly,
Yeah. Just make sure you
exactly.
get like a film camera and take lots of
Exactly,
photos and then you
exactly.
can frame those photos and then
Honestly, yeah. And it's already bringing us so much joy because all we do right now is send us each other reels about people's Taylor Swift outfits.
Oh,
And
yeah.
also the fact that we're going to be like mid-30s millennials in a mosh pit and we're like, we need to stretch. Like we need to hydrate. How are we going to stand for 8 hours?
God,
like
yeah.
what shoes are we wearing? We're not coping very well.
Yeah, you need like runners or something.
Last night I was like, no, but seriously, I'm panicking about my shoe choice. Like, what are we doing? So
funny.
it's going to be obviously a lifetime experience. And I think it just really sums up the whole, like, you create the guilt,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I was going to say, so at the core of it, is your guilt driven by that it feels like a lot of money for one night? Is that what it is?
And then also other people would be like, that's outrageous.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Yeah, so it's the judgment.
I think it's the judgment. And
Yeah.
I do a little bit of, so I don't really think about the opportunity cost. I do a little bit. Like it does cross my mind that it's like, oh, I could otherwise spend $5,000 as probably, I don't know, a week's accommodation on the trip kind of thing. And maybe that feels frivolous. But then I'm like, yeah, but if you didn't spend the $5,000 to get the tickets, you're not going to have the 48-hour weekend away. You're not going to do that. You're not going to have any of that. So I'm like, I can't just solely value the $5,000 spend on the concert alone.
Yeah.
Because without that,
the
none of the other
time.
stuff
Yeah.
happens. And so then therein lies the justification.
Yeah, nice. I'm here for it.
Thank
I like
you.
it. Also, I think I was reading last night about how apparently the European concerts of Taylor Swift are so much better than the US ones.
excited.
And they're
So
also
excited.
like better priced. Apparently it's like outrageous in the US. So
Yeah.
if that helps with your justification,
And
you're
we are
welcome.
going after her latest album has been released.
Oh,
so the
so you get
concert's
the
longer.
extra-
We're getting
yeah.
extra value. Anyway, I'm sure all the listeners of the pod that hate Taylor Swift will be like, "Kat, shut up about this." I will report back. I might even trouble myself to make a reel. I don't know.
Just to round out all of our chats.
Yes.
I feel like we need some quick fire actions that
Okay.
people can do to remove guilt, and perhaps we can recap some. So I want to start with there's the idea of like changing your perspective. So how do you do that? You can do things like gratitude journaling to move from scarcity to abundance. It's, like
Confirmation of positive messaging to
Yes.
get that into your head.
exactly, because that's ultimately what underlies everything.
Not being afraid to verbalize financial goals. Put it out there that you want to do a particular
Yes.
thing or you want to get to
Sign
a certain
yourself
income
up to
level.
vision boarding events like I have tonight.
Christine will report back.
But it's also things like getting a financial plan or clarity over the numbers. So I think it's taking stock of where you are right now and what are the things that are providing guilt in your life. So it could be, as we said, tracking a week maybe where you are buying some things or a month or whatever. At what points do you feel guilty? And like what are the purchases to then also understand what your threshold is. So that's something. Maybe it is getting accountability, also like a financial advisor.
I was going to say it's finding your person, whether that's a partner, whether it's a financial advisor, an accountant, your friend, family member, someone that can be in your corner so you actually have a reference point.
Yes, nice.
Because like right now for Christine, she has made me feel, I don't feel any guilt for telling you about the Taylor Swift tickets.
Great.
I feel fantastic.
I feel way better about my health.
Great.
Now that I've just told
Excellent.
everyone.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of power in like sharing and the truth, right? Because ultimately you're not saying that piece of information for fear of retribution.
Yeah.
And the minute that you say it and there's no, I'm not judging
Like
you
massive
in that
reaction
moment.
or like-
Exactly. You're like, oh, it's all
That's
good.
fine. Also, sometimes I think you just need a reminder of like the values piece around like this does align. Like you do have space in your budget. You're not going into debt. Like these things, it's not like you're going backwards.
Exactly.
So I think that leads also perfectly into the budget thing and the guilt-free spending. So what I mentioned earlier was that as a result of this spend, I was basically like, look, I'm spending a lot on health. I'm sick of feeling guilty about it. What am I going to do to help justify it to me? So outside of the values, I sat down and Ramit Sethi, he is, what would you call him? Like a money
Budgeting budget expert. He's got a Netflix show. He's awesome. We love him. We've talked about him before.
He has a podcast and Instagram. Go check him out. But basically, he has an approach to money that is a budget where it has a segment for guilt-free spending. So he says that you should be spending roughly 20 to 35% of your income on guilt-free spending. So that's just aligned spending. He says this category is your fun money and it covers anything that's a want, not a need. So examples could be going out for meals, new clothes and entertainment spending, all of the things that we've literally just talked about. So then to round that out, other categories or how the rest of the 100% is made up is 5 to 10% on your savings goals. So that's things like emergency fund, down payment on a house, other items you save towards, 10% for your investment. So your KiwiSaver online brokerage account, like by that savings account, that kind of thing. Yeah, sorry, investments. Yeah. And then 50 to 60% on your fixed costs. So that's things that are like absolute necessities and
Rent,
essentials. Yeah.
food,
utilities, that kind of stuff.
bills.
Yeah. So I think if you were to sit down and go like take stock of where you're at and then actually categorize those things according to that framework, you might even be surprised that you're underspending on guilt-free spending. And so then it removes the guilt.
Maybe you're saving and investing too much, like Tim and our team was, and he needs to have more fun in his life. And we were like, come on, guilt-free spending.
Exactly. That's kind of what I realized with this. I was like, oh, I'm actually okay in the category. I'm over investing or saving, I think it was. And so I need to like reshuffle slightly. And now I just feel better about it. Yeah.
Great.
And then the last one is to have open conversations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like
about
this.
money. Yeah.
Or just listen to the podcast where there is open conversations and then hopefully you feel better about yourself.
You can slide into our DMs and we'll make you feel better about your purchase.
Exactly. I know that there's lots of people out there that do not like Taylor Swift. So like if I can admit that, then I think we'll be okay talking about other things on the show.
Yeah, exactly.
So yes.
Love it.
Do slide into the DMs. We'd love to hear from you at It's No Secret NZ.
Yeah.
And otherwise we will chat to you next week.
Bye.